She stood at the altar in her pristine white dress, the sun streaming through the stained glass windows, casting rainbows across her face. Family and friends smiled through tears of joy as she said those two words that would change everything. "I do." The church erupted in applause, rice was thrown, and laughter filled the air. But 45 minutes later, when they called for the first dance, the bride was gone. Her bouquet lay abandoned on the reception table. Her phone sat silent in her purse, and the man she'd just married stood alone on an empty dance floor, staring at a door she'd walked through and never walked back from. This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, the woman who vanished minutes after becoming someone's wife, and the dark truth that emerged 5 years later when someone spotted her living under a new name, in a new town, with a ring on her finger that wasn't the one her husband had placed there. What happened in those 45 minutes? Was it love, lies, or something far more complicated? And if you were standing at that altar, if you'd just promised forever to someone, what would it take for you to walk away and never look back? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand how a woman could vanish on what should have been the happiest day of her life, we need to go back to where it all began. Sarah Mitchell wasn't always Sarah Mitchell. She was born Emily Grace Thompson in a small town in rural Oregon, the youngest of 4 children in a family that barely had enough to go around. Her father left when she was 3 years old, and her mother worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Emily grew up in hand-me-down clothes and free lunch lines, watching other girls get picked up from school by both parents while she waited alone at the bus stop. She learned early that life wasn't fair, that some people got everything while others had to fight for scraps. But she also learned something else. She learned how to dream. Every night, Emily would lie in her twin bed in the room she shared with her 2 sisters and imagine a different life. A life where she wore beautiful clothes, where she lived in a house with a white picket fence, where someone loved her so much they'd never leave. She would imagine her wedding day, walking down an aisle in a dress that cost more than her mother made in a month, marrying a man who looked at her like she was the only person in the world. Those dreams were all she had, and she held on to them with everything she had. By the time Emily was 17, she'd saved enough money from her part-time job at the local diner to take herself to the community college 1 town over. She studied business administration, worked nights and weekends, and graduated with honors. She changed her name legally, from Emily Thompson to Sarah Mitchell when she was 22, choosing a name that sounded sophisticated, that belonged to the kind of woman she wanted to become. Sarah Mitchell could be anyone. Sarah Mitchell could have the life Emily Thompson never could. She moved to Seattle at 23 with $800 in her pocket and a determination that bordered on obsession. She got a job as an administrative assistant at a mid-sized architecture firm, rented a studio apartment in a decent neighborhood, and started rebuilding herself from the ground up. She took night classes in graphic design, learned how to dress for the life she wanted rather than the one she had, studied the way successful people talked and carried themselves. She erased every trace of Emily Thompson, the poor girl from Oregon who wore second-hand shoes and never quite fit in. Sarah Mitchell was confident, polished, always put together. Sarah Mitchell was the woman she'd dreamed about in that twin bed all those years ago. And then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in November, she met Daniel Hayes. He was 31, an architect at the firm where she worked, with dark hair that was always slightly messy and a smile that made her stomach flip. He came to her desk to ask about a file, and somehow that simple interaction turned into a conversation about their favorite coffee shops, which turned into him asking if she wanted to grab coffee after work. Sarah said yes without hesitation. She'd been on dates before, but this felt different. Daniel was different. He came from the kind of family Sarah had dreamed about as a child. His parents had been married for 35 years and still held hands when they walked. His younger sister was in medical school. They had family dinners every Sunday and inside jokes that went back decades. When Daniel talked about his childhood, it was with warmth and fondness, not the careful neutrality Sarah had learned to use when people asked about hers. And when he looked at her, really looked at her, she felt seen in a way she never had before. They started dating officially in December, and by Valentine's Day, Daniel told her he loved her. Sarah said it back, and she meant it. She loved him in a way that terrified her, loved him with the kind of intensity that came from years of being alone. For the first time in her life, someone was choosing her, not settling for her, not staying with her out of obligation, but actually choosing her over everyone else. Daniel's family welcomed her warmly, though Sarah sometimes caught his mother watching her with a thoughtful expression she couldn't quite read. His sister Emma became someone Sarah considered her first real friend. They'd go to yoga classes together on Saturday mornings, grab brunch afterward, talk about everything from work drama to their fears about the future. Emma was the one who told Sarah that Daniel was going to propose before he actually did it. They were sitting in a cafe on a Sunday afternoon when Emma leaned across the table with a conspiratorial smile and said, "He bought the ring. He showed it to me last week. He's going to ask you soon. I can feel it." Sarah's heart had stopped for a moment. She'd known it was coming, had hoped for it with every fiber of her being, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "What did you say?" Sarah had asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma had laughed and reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "I told him you're the best thing that ever happened to him, which is the truth. I told him if he doesn't lock you down, someone else will." Sarah had smiled, but something in her chest had tightened. Because Emma didn't know the truth. None of them did. They didn't know about Emily Thompson or the childhood she'd spent learning how to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. They didn't know about the shame she still carried, or the fear that someday they'd figure out she wasn't really one of them. Daniel proposed 3 weeks later on a Friday evening in March. He took her to the restaurant where they'd had their first official date, ordered champagne, and got down on one knee right there in the middle of the dining room. Sarah said yes through tears that were real. So real it scared her. She loved him. She wanted to marry him. She wanted the life they were going to build together. But there was a small voice in the back of her mind that whispered, "What if he finds out? What if they all find out?" Find out what, exactly? That she'd changed her name? That she'd grown up poor? That her family barely spoke to each other anymore and her mother hadn't returned her calls in over a year? Those things shouldn't have mattered, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they did. That if the Hayes family knew the truth about where she came from, they'd see her differently. They'd realize she didn't really belong. The wedding planning started immediately. Daniel's mother, Catherine, was thrilled to help, offering to cover costs that made Sarah's head spin. The venue, a historic estate outside the city, cost more than Sarah had made in her entire first year in Seattle. The dress was custom designed by someone Catherine knew through a friend. The guest list ballooned to 200 people, most of whom Sarah had never met, but who were apparently essential to invite. Sarah went along with it all, smiling and nodding and trying not to think about the fact that she'd have fewer than 10 people on her side of the church. When Catherine gently asked about her family, Sarah gave the story she'd been perfecting for years. Her parents were divorced, she said. Her mother lived out of state and had health issues that made traveling difficult. Her father wasn't in the picture. She had siblings, but they weren't close. It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't entirely the truth either. Catherine had nodded sympathetically and said she understood, though Sarah saw the flicker of something in her eyes. Pity, maybe, or concern. It made Sarah's stomach turn. The months leading up to the wedding were a blur of dress fittings and flower selections and seating charts that had to be revised a dozen times. Daniel was patient through all of it, supportive in a way that made Sarah love him even more. But there were moments when the pressure of it all became too much. Moments when Sarah would lock herself in the bathroom and stare at her reflection in the mirror and wonder who the woman staring back at her was. Was she Sarah Mitchell, the successful woman who was about to marry into a loving, wealthy family? Or was she still Emily Thompson, the poor girl from Oregon who was playing dress-up in someone else's life? 2 months before the wedding, Sarah's mother called. It was the first time they'd spoken in over a year, and the sound of her mother's voice on the other end of the line made Sarah's chest tighten. "I heard you're done, getting married," her mother said, her tone flat and accusatory. "Were you planning on telling me?" Sarah took a breath, steadied herself. "I sent you an invitation," she said, which was true. She'd sent it to the last address she had for her mother, though she'd had no idea if her mother still lived there. "I didn't get it," her mother said, though Sarah suspected she was lying. "So when is it? And are you expecting me to come?" Sarah closed her eyes. "The wedding is in August. And no, Mom, I'm not expecting anything. I know traveling is hard for you." There was a long pause. "Traveling is hard for me. That's the story you're telling people, isn't it? That I'm sick or can't afford to come or whatever lie makes you look better? That's not fair," Sarah said quietly. "Fair?" her mother snapped. "You want to talk about fair? You changed your name, moved away, and act like you're too good for the rest of us now. I think I don't know what you're doing. You're pretending like your old life never happened. Like I never happened." Sarah's hands were shaking. "I'm not pretending anything. I just wanted a fresh start." "A fresh start," her mother repeated mockingly. "That's what you call it when you erase your family? When you become someone else so you can marry some rich guy and never have to think about where you came from?" The words hit harder than Sarah expected, because there was truth in them. Even if her mother's delivery was cruel, she had wanted to erase her past. She had wanted to become someone new, and she'd done it so thoroughly that even she sometimes forgot who she'd been before. "I have to go," Sarah said, her voice tight. "Wait," her mother said. And there was something different in her tone now, softer, almost pleading. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I just miss you, Emily. I miss my daughter." "My name is Sarah now," Sarah said quietly. "I'm sorry, Mom, but I have to go." She hung up before her mother could respond, and then she sat on the edge of her bed and cried in a way she hadn't cried in years, because her mother was right. She was pretending. She'd built this entire life on a foundation of half-truths and carefully crafted stories, and she was terrified that one day it would all come crashing down. But she couldn't stop now. She'd come too far. She'd worked too hard. And Daniel loved her, the real her, even if he didn't know all the details. That had to be enough. The night before the wedding, Sarah lay awake in the hotel room she was sharing with Emma and 2 of Daniel's cousins who'd flown in for the occasion. The other women were asleep, but Sarah couldn't quiet her mind. She kept thinking about her mother's words, about the life she'd left behind, about the person she used to be. She thought about Daniel, sweet and kind and good, and wondered if he'd still love her if he knew the truth. If he knew how deeply ashamed she was of where she came from, how hard she'd worked to bury Emily Thompson so completely that even she couldn't find her anymore. She thought about walking down the aisle tomorrow, about saying, "I do," in front of 200 people who thought they knew her but didn't really know her at all. And for the first time, she wondered if she could actually go through with it. But morning came, as it always does, and with it came the hair and makeup artists and the photographer and the dress that cost more than her mother's car. Sarah let herself be pulled into the current of the day, let herself be painted and perfected and positioned for photos. She smiled when she was supposed to smile, laughed when she was supposed to laugh, and tried not to think about the fact that her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 o'clock in the afternoon at a small church on the outskirts of Seattle. It was charming and intimate, with exposed wooden beams and windows that let in streams of golden sunlight. The pews filled with guests, all dressed in their finest, chattering excitedly about the beautiful bride and the handsome groom. Daniel stood at the altar in his tuxedo, looking nervous and happy in equal measure. Sarah waited in the small room off to the side, her hands shaking so badly that Emma had to help her hold her bouquet. "You okay?" Emma asked, her eyes full of concern. You look pale." "I'm fine," Sarah said automatically. "Just nervous." "It's normal to be nervous. But Daniel loves you so much, Sarah. You're going to be so happy together." Sarah nodded, forcing a smile. "I know. We FD. We FD. We FD. FD. We FD. Thank you." The music started, and Sarah's heart lurched. This was it. This was the moment she'd been dreaming about her entire life. She was about to walk down that aisle and marry the man she loved, and everything was going to be perfect. Except it wasn't. Because, as Sarah stood there in her beautiful dress with her heart racing and her hands shaking, all she could think about was her mother's voice on the phone 2 months ago. "You're pretending like your old life never happened, like I never happened." The processional began, and Sarah watched as Emma and the other bridesmaids made their way down the aisle one by one. Then the music changed to the familiar notes of the bridal march, and everyone stood. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped through the doorway into the church. Every face turned toward her, 200 people watching her walk toward the man she was about to promise forever to. She saw Daniel at the end of the aisle, his eyes bright with tears, and she felt a rush of love so powerful it almost knocked her over. She wanted this. She wanted him. She wanted the life they were going to build together. But she also wanted to be someone she wasn't, and she couldn't shake the feeling that eventually that lie was going to catch up to her. Sarah reached the altar, and Daniel took her hands. His palms were warm, steady, and she held onto them like they were the only thing keeping her from floating away. The pastor began to speak, his voice calm and measured, but Sarah barely heard the words. She was too busy trying to quiet the voice in her head that kept whispering, "What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?" And then the pastor asked the question she'd been waiting for her entire life. "Do you, Sarah Mitchell, take Daniel Hayes to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Sarah looked at Daniel, at his kind eyes and his hopeful smile, and she thought about all the reasons she loved him: his patience, his generosity, the way he made her feel safe. She thought about the life they were going to have together, the children they'd talked about having, the home they'd planned to build. She thought about all of it, and then she said the words that would change everything. "I do." The church erupted in applause, and Daniel's smile could have lit up the entire room. He leaned in to kiss her, and for that one perfect moment, Sarah let herself believe that everything was going to be okay. That love was enough, that she could bury Emily Thompson forever and just be Sarah Mitchell, Daniel's wife, for the rest of her life. They walked back down the aisle hand in hand, rice falling like snow around them, and Sarah smiled so hard her face hurt. Everyone was watching them, celebrating them, and she felt like she was floating. This was what she'd always wanted. This was the dream. The reception was held at the same historic estate where they'd had their engagement party 6 months earlier. It was beautiful, with long tables covered in white linens and centerpieces of roses and peonies. Fairy lights hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over everything. A live band played softly as guests found their seats, and Sarah and Daniel stood at the entrance, greeting everyone as they arrived. Catherine hugged Sarah tightly and whispered, "Welcome to the family, sweetheart." And Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. This was real. This was her family now. She belonged here. The reception began with toasts from Daniel's best man and Emma, both of whom told funny stories about Daniel and Sarah that made everyone laugh. Sarah smiled through it all, her hand resting on Daniel's thigh under the table, and tried to soak in every moment. But there was something pulling at her, a tightness in her chest that wouldn't go away. It was the feeling she'd been fighting all day, the sense that something wasn't right, that she was standing on the edge of a cliff, and one wrong step would send her tumbling over. About 45 minutes into the reception, Sarah excused herself to use the restroom. Daniel kissed her cheek and told her to hurry back, and Sarah nodded, promising she'd only be a minute. She walked through the crowd, smiling at guests as she passed, and made her way to the restroom at the back of the estate. But when she got there, She didn't go inside. Instead, she stood in the hallway, her back against the wall, and tried to catch her breath. Her heart was racing, her palms were sweating, and she felt like she was going to be sick. What was wrong with her? This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She was married to a man she loved, surrounded by people who cared about her. She should be celebrating, not hiding in a hallway trying not to have a panic attack. But that voice in her head wouldn't stop, the one that kept asking, "What are you doing? What have you done?" Sarah pulled out her phone with shaking hands, though she wasn't sure who she was planning to call. Her mother? Her siblings, who she hadn't spoken to in years? There was no one. No one who really knew her. No one she could confess to. She scrolled through her contacts anyway, her vision blurring with tears, and that's when she saw it. A text message from a number she didn't recognize. It had come through during the ceremony, and she'd been too distracted to notice. The message was short, just 6 words. "I know who you really are." Sarah's blood ran cold. Her hands started shaking so hard she almost dropped the phone. She stared at the words, reading them over and over, trying to make sense of them. Another message came through before she could process the first. Emily Thompson, from Oregon. Poor little Emily, who pretended to be someone else. Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. Her chest was tight, her vision was narrowing, and the walls of the hallway seemed to be closing in around her. Someone knew. Someone had figured it out. And now they were going to tell everyone. They were going to expose her in front of Daniel and his family and all 200 guests at her wedding reception. Everything she'd built, everything she'd worked for, was about to come crashing down. A third message appeared. "Meet me outside by the garden entrance in 5 minutes. Come, alone or I tell everyone." Sarah's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the phone. She looked back toward the reception hall, where she could hear the band playing and people laughing. Daniel was in there, probably wondering where she was. She should go back. She should tell him what was happening. But what would she say? That someone was threatening to expose her for lying about who she was? That she'd built their entire relationship on a foundation of half-truths and omissions? That she'd been so ashamed of her past that she'd erased it completely? She couldn't do that. She couldn't watch the look of betrayal and disappointment cross his face. She couldn't stand there while his family realized they'd welcomed a fraud into their lives. So instead, Sarah did the only thing she could think to do. She walked. She walked down the hallway, past the reception hall, out through a side door she'd noticed during the venue tour months ago. She walked across the lawn in her wedding dress, the fabric catching on the grass, her heels sinking into the soft earth. She walked toward the garden entrance where the mysterious texter had told her to meet them, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might explode. When she got there, no one was waiting. The garden was empty, quiet, except for the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Sarah stood there in her wedding dress, alone, and realized what had happened. Someone had lured her out here. Someone wanted her to run, and she'd fallen for it. Or maybe, a small voice whispered, maybe this is what she wanted all along. An excuse to run, an excuse to escape before everything fell apart. Sarah looked back toward the estate, where her new husband was waiting for her, where her new family was celebrating. She looked at her phone, at the threatening messages from the unknown number, and then she looked down at the ring on her finger, the symbol of forever she'd just promised. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, torn between going back and running forward. And then she made a choice that would change everything. Away from the estate, away from the reception, away from Daniel and Catherine and Emma, and everyone who thought they knew her but didn't really know her at all. She walked in her wedding dress until she reached the main road, and then she flagged down a passing car. The driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked shocked but pulled over. "Are you okay?" the woman asked, staring at Sarah's elaborate dress and tear-stained face. "I need a ride." Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I just need to get away from here." The woman hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Get in." Sarah climbed into the passenger seat, her dress billowing around her, and as the car pulled away from the curb, she didn't look back. She couldn't, because if she looked back, she might see Daniel standing in the doorway of the estate, searching for her, and if she saw him, she might change her mind. She might go back and try to explain, try to make him understand. But she knew she couldn't. She knew that the moment she walked back into that reception hall, everything would fall apart. So instead, she kept her eyes forward and let the woman drive her away from the wedding, away from the life she'd built, away from everything. The woman drove Sarah to a bus station 20 minutes away, asking gentle questions that Sarah answered with vague half-truths. She said she'd had a fight with her fiancé, that she needed some space, that she had somewhere to go. The woman didn't push, just gave Sarah $50 and told her to take care of herself. Sarah bought a ticket on the next bus heading south, not caring where it was going. She sat in the back row in her wedding dress, her phone turned off, and stared out the window as Seattle disappeared behind her. She thought about Daniel, about the look on his face when someone finally told him his bride was gone. She thought about Catherine and Emma and all the guests who were probably searching for her right now. She thought about the mysterious texts that had pushed her over the edge, wondered who had sent them and how they'd known. But mostly, she thought about Emily Thompson, the girl she'd tried so hard to bury. And she realized that no matter how far she ran, no matter how many times she changed her name, Emily would always be there. Because you can't run from yourself. You can only run from the people who love you. And that's exactly what Sarah had done. The bus took her to Portland, and from there she bought another ticket to a small town in Northern California she'd never heard of. She paid cash for everything, kept her head down, and tried not to think about the fact that she'd just abandoned her new husband on their wedding day. When she finally got off the bus in the small town of Redding, California, it was past midnight. Sarah found a cheap motel, paid for a room with the last of her cash, and locked herself inside. She sat on the edge of the bed in her wedding dress, which was now dirty and torn, and let herself cry. Really cry. The kind of crying that leaves you gasping for air and feeling like your chest might crack open. What had she done? She'd married a man who loved her, and then she'd run away without a word. She'd destroyed the one good thing in her life, because she was too afraid to be honest, because she was too ashamed of who she used to be to let anyone see the truth. Sarah took off her wedding dress and stuffed it in the motel room trash can. She took a shower, put on the complimentary bathrobe, and climbed into bed. And for the first time in years, she let herself think about Emily Thompson, about the little girl who'd grown up in poverty and shame, who'd dreamed of a better life and done everything she could to make it happen, about the woman who'd changed her name and moved away and built a whole new identity because she couldn't stand to be reminded of where she came from, about the person she really was underneath all the polish and pretense. And Sarah realized something. She'd spent so much time running from Emily that she'd lost track of who Sarah was supposed to be. She'd created this perfect version of herself, this woman who had it all together and fit seamlessly into Daniel's world. But that woman wasn't real. She was a character Sarah had invented, a role she'd played so convincingly that even she'd started to believe it. But underneath it all, she was still Emily. Still the girl who didn't feel good enough, who was terrified of being found out, who believed deep down that she didn't deserve happiness, and no matter how far she ran, she'd never be able to escape that. Sarah stayed in that motel room for 3 days. She turned on the news and saw stories about her disappearance. "Bride vanishes from wedding reception," the headlines screamed. After ceremony. There were photos of her and Daniel on their wedding day, looking happy and in love, and Sarah had to turn away because she couldn't stand to see what she'd destroyed. The police were looking for her, treating it as a possible kidnapping or foul play. Daniel had given interviews, his face haggard and desperate, begging for anyone with information to come forward. "Please," he'd said into the cameras, his voice breaking. "If you're out there, Sarah, just come home. We can work through whatever this is. I love you. I just want you to come home." Sarah had cried watching that interview, cried until she couldn't breathe, because she knew she couldn't go home. She couldn't face him. She couldn't look him in the eye and explain why she'd run. Because how do you explain to someone that you loved them so much it terrified you? That you were so afraid of losing them, you decided to lose them first? How do you explain that shame and fear drove you to destroy the best thing that ever happened to you? On the fourth day, Sarah left the motel. She'd found a job posting at a local diner, applied using her real name, Emily Thompson, and got hired on the spot. She found a tiny studio apartment above a bookstore, paid the first month's rent with money she'd managed to scrape together, and started over again. But this time, she didn't try to be anyone other than who she was. She was Emily Thompson, the woman who'd run away from her wedding because she was too afraid to be honest, the woman who'd hurt someone she loved because she couldn't face her own shame, the woman who was trying to figure out who she was when she wasn't pretending to be someone else. Months passed. Emily worked at the diner, kept to herself, and tried not to think about Daniel. But he was always there, in the back of her mind, a constant reminder of what she'd lost. She wondered if he'd moved on, if he'd found someone else, if he hated her. She wondered if she'd ever be able to forgive herself for what she'd done. And then, about a year after she'd run, Emily met someone. His name was Marcus, and he was a regular at the diner where she worked. He was quiet and kind, a mechanic who lived a few blocks away. He started coming in every morning for coffee, and gradually, they started talking. Not about anything deep at first, just small talk about the weather and how the day was going. But over time, the conversations grew longer, more personal. Marcus told her about his childhood, about growing up in a military family and moving every few years, about never quite feeling like he belonged anywhere, and Emily found herself opening up to him in a way she never had before. She told him about growing up poor in Oregon, about changing her name and moving away. She didn't tell him about the wedding, not at first, but she told him enough that he could see who she really was, and instead of being scared off, Marcus seemed to appreciate her honesty. One night, after she'd known him for about 6 months, Marcus asked her out on a real date. Emily said yes, even though part of her wanted to say no. Part of her wanted to keep her distance, to protect herself from getting hurt again, but she'd spent so much of her life running that she was tired, so she went on the date, and then another, and another, and slowly. Marcus was different from Daniel in almost every way. He came from a modest background, like Emily did, and he didn't have the kind of expectations that Daniel's family had. He was content with a simple life, a small house, a steady job. He didn't need Emily to be anyone other than who she was, and maybe that's what made it work. For the first time in her life, Emily wasn't trying to be someone else. She wasn't hiding her past or ashamed of where she came from. She was just herself, flawed and complicated and still figuring it out, and Marcus loved her anyway. They dated for 2 years before Marcus proposed. It wasn't elaborate or expensive. He took her to a lookout point above the town, got down on one knee, and asked her to marry him with a ring he'd saved for months to buy. Emily said yes, tears streaming down her face, because she knew this time was different. This time, she wasn't running. This time, she was choosing to stay. But before they could get married, Emily knew she had to tell Marcus the truth. All of it. She'd been carrying the weight of what she'd done to Daniel for 3 years now, and it was starting to crush her. So one night, sitting on the couch in Marcus's small house, Emily told him everything. About Daniel, about the wedding, about running away without a word, about the mysterious text messages that had pushed her over the edge, about the shame and fear that had driven her to destroy her own life. Marcus listened without interrupting, his face serious but not judgmental. When she finished, there was a long silence. Emily's heart was pounding, waiting for him to tell her he couldn't. marry someone who'd done something so terrible. But instead, Marcus took her hands and said, Emily asked, confused, "You're not angry? You don't think I'm a terrible person?" "I think you made a mistake," Marcus said carefully. "A big one, but I also think you were hurting, and you didn't know how else to handle it. That doesn't make it right, but it doesn't make you a monster either." She asked. "He spent years not knowing what happened to me. His family must have been devastated. How can I marry you knowing I did that to someone else?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think you need to reach out to him, not to ask for forgiveness or to try to explain everything away, just to let him know you're okay and that what happened wasn't his fault. He deserves that much." Emily knew Marcus was right. She'd known it for years but had been too scared to face it. That night, she sat down and wrote Daniel a letter. It took her hours to find the right words, and even then, they felt inadequate. She apologized for running, for not having the courage to be honest with him. She told him it wasn't his fault, that the problem had always been her own fear and shame. She didn't ask for forgiveness because she didn't think she deserved it. She just wanted him to know the truth. She mailed the letter to the last address she had for him, not knowing if he still lived there or if he'd even read it. And then she tried to move forward. Emily and Marcus got married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the courthouse with just a handful of friends present. It wasn't the fairy tale wedding Emily had dreamed about as a child, but it was real. It was honest. And for the first time in her life, Emily felt like she belonged exactly where she was. They bought a small house on the outskirts of town, and Emily got a job at a local non-profit helping women who were trying to rebuild their lives after hardship. It felt meaningful in a way her work in Seattle never had. She was using her past, all the pain and struggle and shame, to help other people who were going through similar things. For the first time, she wasn't running from Emily Thompson. She was embracing her. Marcus and Emily built a life together that was simple but good. They had a garden in their backyard and a dog they rescued from the shelter. They had friends over for barbecues and spent weekends hiking in the nearby mountains. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and Emily was happier than she'd been in years. But she never forgot about Daniel. She thought about him often, wondered if he'd received her letter, if he'd moved on. Part of her hoped he had. Part of her hoped he'd found someone who could give him the love and honesty she never could. And then, 5 years after she'd run away from her wedding, Emily got a phone call that changed everything. It was from a number she didn't recognize, and when she answered, a woman's voice said, "Is this Emily Thompson?" Emily's heart stopped. No one called her Emily anymore except Marcus and a few close friends. Most people in her new life only knew her by her married name, Emily Parker. "Who is this?" Emily asked cautiously. "My name is Catherine Hayes," the woman said, and Emily's entire world, Emily's entire world, tilted. Catherine Hayes, Daniel's mother, the woman who had welcomed her into their family, who had paid for that beautiful wedding, who had hugged her and called her sweetheart. "I don't know if you remember me," Catherine continued, her voice calm but firm, "but I've been looking for you for a long time, Sarah. Or should I call you Emily?" Emily's hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. Her mind was racing, trying to figure out how Catherine had found her, what she wanted, whether she was angry or hurt or something else entirely. "How did you find me?" Emily managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Catherine let out a soft breath. "It took a while. Private investigators, following leads that went nowhere. But then we got your letter. The one you sent to Daniel 3 years ago. It had a postmark from Redding, California, and we started there. It still took time, but eventually we found you." Emily felt sick. She'd thought that letter would give Daniel closure, not lead his family right to her door. "What do you want?" she asked, unable to keep the fear out of her voice. "I want to talk," my finger with her. "I want to talk," Catherine said simply. "I'm in town right now, actually, at a cafe called the Millstone on Main Street. Could you meet me there in an hour? Every instinct in Emily's body screamed at her to say no, to hang up, to run again. But she'd spent 5 years trying to stop running, and maybe this was part of that, facing the damage she'd caused instead of hiding from it. "I'll be there," Emily said quietly, and then hung up before she could change her mind. She sat on her couch for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Marcus was at work and wouldn't be home for hours. She was completely alone with this. Emily thought about calling him, but she knew what he'd say. He'd tell her she didn't have to go, that she didn't owe Catherine anything, and maybe he'd be right. But Emily needed to do this. She arrived at the Millstone Cafe 45 minutes later, having changed her clothes 3 times and spent 20 minutes sitting in her car trying to work up the courage to go inside. When she finally walked through the door, she spotted Catherine immediately. She was sitting at a corner table, looking older than Emily remembered but still elegant in a way that made Emily acutely aware of her own Target jeans and worn sweater. Catherine looked up as Emily approached, and their eyes met. Emily expected to see anger there, maybe hatred. But instead, Catherine's expression was complicated, a mixture of relief and sadness, and something Emily couldn't quite identify. "Thank you for coming," Catherine said as Emily sat down across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," Emily admitted. A waitress came by and they both ordered coffee, neither of them speaking until she'd left. Then Catherine folded her hands on the table and looked at Emily with those sharp, intelligent eyes that had always made Emily feel slightly transparent. "I'm not here to yell at you," Catherine said finally, "or to demand answers, though I would like some. I'm here because I need you to understand what you did, what it did to my son." Emily felt tears prick at her eyes, but she forced herself to hold Catherine's gaze. "I know," she said. "I think about it every day. What I did to Daniel, to your family. I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't undo 5 years of pain," Catherine said, and there was steel in her voice now. "Do you have any idea what it was like? We thought you were dead. We thought someone had taken you, hurt you." Daniel blamed himself. He tore himself apart trying to figure out what he'd done wrong, what he'd missed. Emily's tears were flowing freely now. "I tried to tell him that in the letter." "He got the letter," Catherine said. 3 years after you disappeared. By then, he'd finally started to heal. And your letter ripped all those wounds open again." Emily felt like she was going to be sick. She'd thought the letter would help, would give Daniel the closure he needed. Instead, she'd just hurt him all over again. She whispered again, knowing how inadequate the words were. "I was terrified and ashamed, and I didn't know how to handle it. I know that's not an excuse. I know I should have stayed, should have been honest. But I panicked, and by the time I realized what I'd done, it felt too late to fix it." Her for a long moment. "What were you so afraid of?" she asked. "Daniel loved you. We all did. What could have been so terrible that running seemed like the only option?" And so Emily told her. She told Catherine about growing up poor, about changing her name, about the shame she'd carried her entire life, about where she came from. She told her about the mysterious text messages she'd received during the reception, about the panic that had seized her when she thought someone was going to expose her. She told her everything, holding nothing back, because what was the point of hiding now? Catherine listened without interrupting, her expression softening slightly as Emily talked. When Emily finished, Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then she said something Emily never expected. "I knew." Emily blinked. "What?" "I knew you'd changed your name," Catherine said. "I knew about your background, about your family situation. I had a private investigator look into you after Daniel told us he was going to propose. Not because I didn't like you," she added quickly, seeing Emily's expression, "but because I wanted to make sure you weren't after Daniel's money or hiding something dangerous. When I found out you'd changed your name, I dug deeper and learned about Emily Thompson, About your childhood, your family. Emily felt like the ground had dropped out from under her. You knew? The whole time? The whole time, Catherine confirmed. And I never said anything because it didn't matter. You were good to my son. You made him happy. I didn't care if you came from money or grew up in a mansion or changed your name. None of that mattered to me. Emily was crying so hard now she could barely breathe. Then who sent those messages? She managed to ask between sobs. The ones that said they knew who I really was? Catherine shook her head. I don't know. We tried to track down the number, but it was a burner phone. The investigator we hired thought maybe it was someone from your past, someone who recognized you. Or maybe, she paused, maybe it was just a prank, a cruel joke from someone at the wedding who'd had too much to drink and thought it would be funny to mess with the bride. Emily stared at her in horror. You mean I destroyed everything over a prank? But we never found any evidence that whoever sent those messages actually knew anything about you. They never came forward, never tried to contact you again, which makes me think they didn't actually have any information to reveal. Emily put her head in her hands. She'd run away from her entire life, hurt the man she loved, caused Daniel and his family years of pain and uncertainty, all because of a few text messages that might have been nothing more than a stupid joke. How could she have been so stupid? So cowardly? I ruined Daniel's life over nothing. You made a mistake, Catherine said, and there was a hint of compassion in her voice now. A terrible mistake that hurt a lot of people. But you were hurting too, Emily. I can see that now. You were so afraid of being found out, so convinced that you didn't deserve the life you'd built, that you destroyed it before anyone else could. Emily looked up at Catherine, tears streaming down her face. How is he? She asked. Daniel. How is he now? Catherine's expression grew complicated again. He's okay. It took a long time, but he's okay. They're getting married next month. Emily felt a sharp pain in her chest, but it was mixed with relief. He'd found someone else, someone who presumably wasn't carrying around a lifetime of shame and fear. Someone who wouldn't run away on their wedding day. I'm glad. We are. Tumar, Emily said, and she meant it. He deserves to be happy. He does, Catherine agreed. And so do you, Emily. Despite everything, I believe that. They sat in silence for a moment, and then Catherine reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. She slid it across the table to Emily. What's this? Emily asked. A letter, Catherine said. From Daniel. He asked me to give it to you, if I ever found you. He wrote it about a year ago, after he got engaged to Claire. Emily's hands were shaking as she picked up the envelope. She looked at Catherine, who nodded, giving her permission to open it. The letter inside was short, written in Daniel's familiar handwriting. Sarah, or Emily, or whoever you are now, it began. Mom told me she was going to try to find you. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Part of me wants to never think about you again. Part of me needs to know you're okay. I spent 3 years thinking you were dead, 3 years wondering if I could have saved you, if I'd missed some sign that you were in danger. When your letter arrived, it was like being punched in the gut all over, again, because you weren't dead. You weren't kidnapped or hurt. You just left. You chose to walk away from me, from us, and you never looked back. I won't lie and say that doesn't hurt. It does. It probably always will. But I'm writing this to tell you that I forgive you. Not because I understand why you did it. I'm not sure I ever will. But because holding on to anger and pain wasn't helping me heal. It was just keeping me stuck in the past. I hope you've found whatever you were looking for when you ran. I hope you've made peace with whatever demons were chasing you. And I hope you've found someone who makes you happy, someone you can be honest with. Because that's what you deserved all along. Not the perfect wedding or the big house or the fancy family. Just someone who loved you for exactly who you were. I wish you'd believed that I could be that person. But I understand now that maybe you didn't believe it yourself. Maybe you didn't. I think you deserve to be loved like that. And that's something only you could fix, not me. So this is goodbye, Emily Thompson. I'm letting you go. Not because I don't care, but because I do. Because holding on to what we could have had is keeping me from appreciating what I have now. I'm happy. I'm moving forward. And I hope you are too. Daniel. Emily read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face the entire time. When she finally looked up at Catherine, she saw that the older woman had tears in her eyes too. He's a good man, Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. He always was. He is, Catherine agreed. And you're not a bad person, Emily. You made a bad choice. There's a difference. Sometimes I feel like running is all I know how to do. Then stop running, Catherine said simply. You've built a life here, haven't you? You have a husband, a home, people who care about you. Stop running from that. Stop waiting for it to fall apart. Just live it. Emily nodded, wiping at her tears. I'm trying, she said. Every day, I'm trying. Catherine reached across the table and squeezed Emily's hand. That's all any of us can do. They talked for another hour. About smaller things now. Catherine told her about Emma, who was finishing her medical residency and engaged to be married herself, about the family dog who'd passed away last year, about the changes in Seattle and how the city had grown. Emily told her about Marcus, about her work at the non-profit, about the simple life she'd built in Reading, and slowly, some of the weight Emily had been carrying for 5 years began to lift. Not all of it, maybe not even most of it, but enough that she could breathe a little easier. Take care of yourself, she said. And Emily? Stop punishing yourself. You've paid enough. Emily hugged her back, holding on maybe a little, longer than necessary. Thank you, she whispered, for finding me, for telling me about Daniel, for not hating me. I could never hate you, Catherine said. You made my son happy, even if it was only for a little while. That means something. They parted ways in the parking lot, and Emily sat in her car for a long time before starting the engine. She pulled out Daniel's letter and read it one more time, committing every word to memory. Then she carefully folded it and put it in her glove compartment. She'd keep it there, a reminder of what she'd lost but also what she'd learned. That you can't run from yourself. That shame will destroy you if you let it. That love requires honesty, even when honesty is terrifying. When Marcus came home that evening, Emily told him everything. About Catherine's visit, about Daniel's letter, about the conversation they'd had, and Marcus held her while she cried, and then he made her dinner and told her he loved her. And for the first time since she'd run away from that wedding 5 years ago, Emily believed she might actually deserve it. The months that followed were different somehow, lighter. Emily still thought about Daniel sometimes, still carried a kernel of regret for what she'd done, but it didn't consume her anymore. She'd faced the damage she'd caused, and while she couldn't undo it, she could learn from it. She threw herself into her work at the nonprofit, helping other women rebuild their lives after trauma or hardship. She found that telling her story, owning what she'd done and how she'd grown from it, helped others who were struggling with their own shame and fear. She became someone they could look to as proof that you could survive your worst mistakes and still build something good on the other side. She and Marcus bought a bigger house with a yard big enough for the vegetable garden Emily had always wanted. They talked about having children someday, though they weren't in any rush. They built a life that was real, and messy, and imperfect, and Emily learned to be okay with that. She learned that perfection was a prison, not a goal. One afternoon, about 8 months after Catherine's visit, Emily was working in her garden when her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer it. Hello? Emily? It's Emma. Emma Hayes. Emily's heart stuttered. Daniel's sister, the woman who'd been her maid of honor, who'd been her friend. Emma, Emily breathed. "Hi. I didn't expect to hear from you." "I know," Emma said, and she sounded nervous. "Mom told me she'd found you, that you two had talked. I've been debating whether to call for months now. I hope it's okay that I did." "Of course it's okay," Emily said, though her heart was pounding. "How are you?" They talked for over an hour. Emma told her about finishing her residency, about getting married to her longtime boyfriend, about how the family had healed slowly over the years, how they'd learned to move forward, and then, toward the end of the conversation, Emma said something that made Emily's chest tighten. "Daniel asked me not to call you," she admitted. "He said he'd made his peace with everything and didn't want to dredge it all up again. But I needed to tell you something." "What?" Emily asked, almost afraid of the answer. "That day you disappeared," Emma said slowly. "Those text messages you got. I've thought about them a lot over the years, and I think I might know who sent them." Emily felt cold all over. "Who?" "Ethan's cousin, Jessica," Emma said. "She had a crush on Daniel for years, way before he met you. She was at the wedding, and I remember seeing her on her phone looking smug about something right around the time you disappeared. I didn't think anything of it then, but later, after we found out about the messages, I wondered. I asked her about it once, and she denied it, but her reaction was strange, defensive." Emily closed her eyes. So, it probably had been a prank after all. Someone, jealous and petty, who wanted to ruin her wedding day. And it had worked beyond their wildest dreams. "Why are you telling me this now?" Emily asked. "Because I don't want you to spend the rest of your life thinking those messages meant something they didn't," Emma said. "You made a choice to run, and that's on you. But whoever sent those texts was cruel and vindictive, and they don't get to live rent-free in your head for the rest of your life. You were set up to panic, Emily. Yes, you could have handled it better. But someone deliberately tried to hurt you on your wedding day, and I wanted you to know that." Emily was crying again, but this time the tears felt different, cleaner somehow. "Thank you," she whispered, "for telling me, for calling. I miss you," Emma said suddenly. "I know that's weird to say after everything, but I do. You were a good friend, Emily. I hope you're happy now." "I am," Emily said, and she realized she meant it. "I really am." After they hung up, Emily sat in her garden for a long time, thinking about everything. About the girl she'd been, and the woman she'd become. About the mistakes she'd made and the grace she'd been shown. About second chances and forgiveness, and learning to live with your regrets without letting them define you. That night, she told Marcus about Emma's call. And then she did something she'd been thinking about for a while. She wrote Daniel one more letter. Not to ask for forgiveness or to explain herself again, just to say thank you. Thank you for loving her when she couldn't love herself. Thank you for the grace in his letter, for letting her go so she could move forward. Thank you for showing her what real love looked like, even if she hadn't been ready to receive it at the time. She told him she was happy for him and Claire, that she hoped they had the beautiful life together that he deserved. And she told him she was sorry, one last time, not because she expected it to change anything, but because she needed to say it. She mailed the letter and didn't expect a response. And she didn't get one, which was okay. Some things didn't need a response. Some things just needed to be said. Years passed. Emily and Marcus had 2 children, a daughter named Grace and a son named Henry. Emily continued her work at the non-profit, eventually becoming the director. She spoke at conferences about second chances and rebuilding your life after trauma. She never hid what she'd done, using her story as a cautionary tale about what happens when shame and fear drive your decisions. She stayed in touch with Emma, who sent Christmas cards every year with photos of her growing family. Catherine sent a card once, too, a few years after their meeting, with a simple note that said, "Thinking of you. I hope you're well." Emily kept it in a box with Daniel's letters, mementos of the life she'd almost had, and the lessons she'd learned from losing it. She never forgot what she'd done. The pain she'd caused would always be part of her story. But she learned to carry it differently, not as a weight that held her down, but as a reminder of how far she'd come. And every year, on what would have been her anniversary with Daniel, Emily took a moment to think about him, to hope he was happy, to thank him silently for the role he'd played in her life, even if it hadn't turned out the way either of them had planned. So what do you think happened to Sarah or Emily? Was she a victim of her own fear and shame, or was she someone who made a selfish choice and hurt the people who loved her? If you'd been in Daniel's position, could you have forgiven her? Could you have moved on? And if you'd been Emily, standing in that hallway with your phone, showing those threatening messages, what would you have done? Would you have run back to Daniel and confessed everything? Or would fear have driven you to run just like she did? Here's the thing about Emily's story. It's not really about the woman who disappeared from her wedding. It's about the lies we tell ourselves, the shame we carry, and the ways fear can make us destroy the very things we want most. Emily wasn't running from Daniel that day. She was running from herself. From all the shame and insecurity she'd tried to bury by becoming someone new. And the tragedy is that the people who loved her didn't care about any of that. Daniel didn't care if she'd grown up poor or changed her name. His family didn't care if she came from money or had a perfect past. They cared about her, about who she was as a person. But Emily couldn't see that. She was so convinced she wasn't good enough that she couldn't accept the love they were offering her. And by the time she realized the truth, it was too late. She'd already destroyed everything. The question is, was what Emily did unforgivable? She left a man at the altar, caused his family years of pain, made everyone think she was dead or in danger. Those aren't small things. Those are life-altering, devastating things that you don't just get over. But she was also a woman who'd spent her entire life feeling like she didn't deserve good things, who'd been so traumatized by her childhood that she couldn't trust happiness when she found it, who was set up to panic by someone cruel enough to send threatening messages on her wedding day. Does that excuse what she did? No. But does it explain it? Maybe. The truth is, most of us carry shame about something. Maybe not as extreme as Emily's, but we all have parts of ourselves we try to hide. And sometimes, that shame makes us do things we regret. It makes us push people away before they can leave us. It makes us sabotage our own happiness because we don't believe we deserve it. Emily's story is extreme, but the feelings behind it are universal. The fear of being found out, the conviction that we're not good enough, the belief that if people really knew us, they wouldn't love us anymore. And the tragedy is that most of the time, that's not true. Most of the time, the people who love us already see our flaws and love us anyway, but shame blinds us to that. It makes us so focused on hiding our perceived inadequacies that we can't see the love that's right in front of us. So here's what Emily's story teaches us. First, that honesty is harder than running, but infinitely more valuable. Emily could have stayed at that reception. She could have shown Daniel the messages, told him the truth about her past, let him decide if he still wanted to be with her. It would have been terrifying. It might have ended badly anyway, but at least she would have given their love a chance to survive. Instead, she made the decision for both of them, and she destroyed any possibility of reconciliation in the process. Second, that shame thrives in secrecy. As long as Emily kept her past hidden, it had power over her. The moment she started being honest about who she really was, first with Marcus and then with Catherine and Emma, that power began to diminish. She couldn't change what she'd done, but she could stop letting it define her entire life. And third, that forgiveness, both from others and yourself, is possible even after terrible mistakes. Daniel forgave her, not because what she did was okay, but because holding on to anger was hurting him more than it was hurting her. Catherine forgave her because she could see the pain beneath Emily's actions, and eventually Emily began to forgive herself, not by pretending what she did wasn't that bad, but by acknowledging it, learning from it, and refusing to let it be her whole story. Think about your own life for a moment. Is there something you're hiding because you're ashamed of it? Something you think would make people love you less if they knew? Maybe it's not as dramatic as Emily's secret, but it's there, taking up space in your mind, making you feel like you're not quite good enough. What would happen if you were honest about it? Not in a public confession kind of way, but with the people who really matter to you. Would they actually reject you? Or would they surprise you by accepting you anyway? And if you've made mistakes, if you've hurt people because you were scared or ashamed or just didn't know better, have you forgiven yourself? Not in a way that minimizes the harm you caused, but in a way that acknowledges you're human, and humans mess up sometimes. Can you learn from what you did wrong and still believe you deserve good things? Emily's story doesn't have a perfect ending. Daniel didn't take her back. She didn't get to undo the pain she caused. But she did build a new life, one based on honesty instead of pretense. She did find love again, and this time she was brave enough to accept it. She did help other women who were struggling with their own shame and fear. And she did learn that you can survive your worst mistakes and still have a life worth living. So, was Emily a villain or a victim? Maybe she was both. Maybe she was just a deeply flawed person who made a terrible choice and then spent the rest of her life trying to do better. And maybe that's all any of us can really do. Make mistakes, learn from them. Try to do better next time. Forgive others when we can. Forgive ourselves when we must. And keep moving forward, even when the weight of our regrets feels too heavy to carry. What do you think about Emily's story? Do you think she deserved a second chance? Do you think Daniel did the right thing by forgiving her and moving on? And most importantly, what would you have done in her position? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this complicated story. If this story left you thinking or feeling something, hit the like button and share it with someone who appreciates complex, real stories about human nature. And don't miss next week's video, where we dive into another true story that will challenge everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and the choices we make when we're desperate. Thanks for watching, and remember, we all have parts of ourselves we wish we could change. The question is, do we let those parts define us, or do we define ourselves by how we respond to them? See you in the next one.